Welcome. Hello folks. So I'm doing something a little bit different today, and in fact I'm just going to be looking at some very sort of traditional orchestration in the sense of converting a piano into an orchestra. And really the best sort of way of learning, apart from studying books and things like that, is to actually just do it and find out what other orchestrators did. One of the best is Respighi, known for his orchestration, Pines of Rome, Fountains of Rome, that sort of thing. And he was asked, I think by Koussevitzky, it's down here, yes, to basically do Rachmaninoff's Etudes-Tableaux for orchestra. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to just look at in a bit of a deep dive, because I'm always intrigued as to how you make something really pianistic into something very orchestral. And of course, you have to not be quite as literal as all that. You need to adapt. One of the sort of the keys to it really is that. So let's have a listen to part of this, and I'm just going to go. I'm not going to go through all of it. I just want to sort of go through specific sorts of technique that Respighi tends to do. So I'll start from the beginning. Here we go. I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit to a slightly different texture here, this one. Okay, so lots of varied textures at that point, but it's really interesting to go back to. Whoops, very strange that it did that. Very interesting to go to what Respighi does. So in terms of how it sounds, let's hear what it sounds like, what the colours are. and so on. I'm just going to fast forward again. So we're around here. There we go. So a variety of textures here, and it's been very helpful to literally just transcribe it out. In addition, keeping the piano there. So what you do is you just minimize it in terms of the mix, so that it doesn't play when you play the full orchestral stuff. But what's really interesting is that you can then see exactly what's going on, and some of it is extremely obvious, and other bits is not. I haven't included all the articulation in the piano part, so that's why sometimes there's no sort of phrase markings and that sort of thing. So what is actually going on? So, well, the first thing is that the tuplets are retained in the second violin. That's sort of pretty obvious, and it tends to be that way pretty much for a long, long time. It doesn't really change, so I'm just sort of going through it with the second violin. Still there. It sort of changes around bar 22, where the violas take over that role, but not for long, I don't think, because once they've done their bit, obviously they go below the violin. It goes below a G, so that's F and E sharp. So and then the violins come back in again as well. So generally speaking, they retain their role, or it's viola if it sort of goes a little bit lower, as you can see all the way through. I'll get onto bar 50 later because that gets very exciting. So the next thing is, of course, being a piano with a pedal, there's a lot of sustain. So how is that sustain achieved? Well, the first thing is the sense of line, which this is. So it's just this line. That we've got. And then these tuplet quavers are retained in terms of the actual pitches in low flutes as well. So first of all, that line is doubled on the clarinet, so it has a little bit of added colour. Just one clarinet at that point. And then we also have the flutes, which sustain that E and A all the way through. Notice there are no breath marks. They're just expected to stagger for 7 very slow bars. They would be breathing during that, and probably at the ends of phrases or halfway between the phrase as well, and trying to work out in their part where to breathe. Orchestrator hasn't bothered with that. Sort of quite traditional. And generally speaking, there are lots of phrase marks rather than actual articulation marks. So I wonder whether the viola players would retake actually at that point. Who knows? I think they probably would. But anyway, the phrase is obviously very important. So we have this. Violins, cellos. Cellos, violins. So now it changes. And the interesting thing is it tends to change on a harmonic change. So we've very firmly in E, in A minor, and then suddenly we've got this new chord in here. Sorry, there's no point playing that because it won't play. So now the role of the second violin is still there, but it's now doubled in the second and third flutes for 2 bars. And the sustain, which was the flutes, is now in 3 solo violas. Really interesting little texture. In addition to that, we've also got this line here where we have the minim and the crotchet, which is being taken over by clarinet 2 and bassoon 1 as well. Very traditional sort of doubling blend texture. That has the added benefit of going chordally with everything else. So if I just play all of the chordal function, this is what we have. So we've got the movement function with the flutes, and then we've got the melodic function with the clarinets and bassoons and the solo violas. So then what happens to the other function? Well, the tune is simply retained in the violin. There's no flute 1 at that point, although you might expect there to be, but there isn't. So then all we're left with is this little bass splash. And what happens is we've got pizzicato going on in the A. Don't forget, we've got the second bit of the violas, or the tutti violas, doing that little pizzicato A. But we've also got a third horn, which also gives it that nice splash of colour with a little bit of articulation at the beginning of the note. A bit like a sort of a piano A, as if it sustains all the way through. Notice that obviously with a pedal, that would sustain pretty much all the way through. So that's why it's crotchet there. Obviously it has to be, and a minim. So all put together, we get this a nice effect. Splash. And then, of course, because the phrase keeps going, another reason for not putting the flute in at that point, because the violins are keeping going with this sort of line. We've still got the 3 violas, which still go back. At this point, the flutes cut out, they go back to their normal role that they were doing before. So we've got these notes, which are here, and the A is obviously sustained all the way through. And then the lower note is taken up by that second clarinet at that point as well, without the bassoon at that point, because we don't need it. That the leading note has sort of gone. So another musical phrase. So that's how it transitions. Yeah, and we're sort of left hanging with that sort of violin at that point. And then we have tutti violas. So it's back to the traditional role of the sort of broken chords going back to the second violins. They were already there, actually. The sustained crotchets, this point violas, and bass clarinet. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the second clarinet is just played. So we've also got the first clarinet, which is now doing the line, the melodic line. So a complete change of role in that. Hence the reason why the E is just simply held all the way through that bar, because it would be on a pedal. So it's a nice little touch, and also just sort of drifts off so that it really sort of closes the gap between this texture and the next texture, or the next colour. And this is something that you don't really ever get from an orchestration book, because they're not really orchestration books. They are instrumentation books that tell you about the instruments, but they don't tell you how they combine with a full orchestra in colours. and that's really important. So I'd urge people to look at the SEVSE Cambridge Guide to Orchestration. It has 50 exercises in it, which go from short score through to full orchestral score, going all the way from Mozart all the way to Respighi, in fact, via Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky and all sorts of different people. So it's definitely something to bear in mind, because colour is crucial. That is orchestration. Instrumentation is sort of stage one. Everything else is stage two. And then refining it is stage three, and that's a sort of lifelong learning. So we've got the bass clarinet and the violas, which blend extremely well together. There we go. We've also got just the cellos on their own. You might expect the bassoon to come in at that point, but they're being saved for a little bit later on. We've then got an interesting blend here, so that instead of the flutes, which have been blending it, or the clarinet at that point, we've now got those notes which are being done by sort of consort horns, so muted horns, and they're taking the notes as and when they change. Notice that it's always on the beat when they appear, even though it's left to the last quaver. So again, it's a good example of not being too literal about your orchestration. It's not just a copying exercise. You actually have to make some decisions. So Respighi has done that. Then let's just listen to that bit. So this the transition. So this was 3 violas. Interestingly enough, when the consort horns come in, it's very loud on Note Performer. It's not very realistic. In here, I think it's a little bit more realistic. Let's see whether we can actually get them to come in. So open horn at that point. Now let's look out for those consort horns. Here they're coming. Very carefully blended. It's almost imperceptible. They actually sound like strings at that point. Really, really clever. And that's what you don't always get from a sort of Note Performer thing. So a nice teaching point that, you know, having a similar harmonic outline with violin 2 and taking the top 2 notes of a broken chord or an Alberti bass type sort of thing, you know, you'll achieve a really nice blend of sound at that point, if that is blend is what you're going for. So really, really interesting. And then we move on to this sort of più vivo section. So the tune is doing that, and it sort of continues there. So that is all on the clarinet. So the clarinet is keeping on going with that melody. Let's just hear it. And I think I probably just missed a slur there, so let's just put one in. Pardon me. Notice also that the violin is still not there. So then, again, the same function is this time with, instead of bass clarinet, we've now got second clarinet taking over. And we've also got these pedal notes here, which are being played by the horn and the bass clarinet. So they're not necessarily all in there, but because they're sustained throughout in terms of the pedal, he's kept them in there. So that's quite crucial. So let's just have a listen to that. So just that and the melody. And then the roll slightly changes because of the A and then the G here. So the role has slightly changed. That is perfectly normal. Don't always think that you have to keep to the same role all the time, within reason. So obviously this is a changing point, so that is the reason behind it. So then accompaniment-wise, we've got the usual thing. We've got our quavers. We've also got the other little bits going on here. And then the flutes take over. Again, the second and third beats are on there. The lower note is on the clarinet too. And it's interesting that there's no blend, there's no overlap between the flute here and the F at that point, because there's a complete change of texture at that point. Most people might have sort of put the F in at that point, da doo dee da, and actually sort of finished the phrase off. But actually in this point, Respighi doesn't choose to do that, which I find quite interesting, because I think I probably would have done. Neither's necessarily right or wrong, it's just a choice, I think, at that point. So then the whole thing sounds like this with the sustain. So now the pedal B. And that's true, because if you think about it, that B is iterated all the time in the piano. And so it makes sense to then sort of, you know, do the lower B, and why not the overtone as well? So that's why the other horn is sort of doing a B, even though it's actually getting in the way of that. But it's not really getting in the way; it's actually blending in. So then the tune keeps going actually in the clarinet. So what's going on now is that we've also got the violas taking over here at this point, because they're going lower than the violin. I think. Oh no, they're not actually. They're not going lower than the violin, but the second violins have had their go at that point. This now is a sort of horn moment where they're all consort, and they'll sound sort of quite stringy. So all of those notes are taken over by homophonically the horns. So that's what we have here. So that's the harmonic outline. And then we also have the rhythmic interpretation of that, now horns and violas. There we go, which is really beautiful. We also have another splash of colour at this point. Instead of the pizz and another horn, it could have been fourth horn. He's chosen to have bass clarinet doing the same role that the horn had before with the splash of colour. So we've now got cello pizz and bass clarinet. Slightly elongated the second time. I've just lost it. There we go. So then we also have the theme, the melody, retained in the clarinet as well. So there it comes together. And now it sort of opens up. So what is happening at that point? Well, first of all, we've got a nice broken chord here, and we've got a sort of pizzicato moment. Let's just do that and make sure that it's really obvious with the cello. So we've got a cello splash at that point. We've also got some of the other notes which are kind of inherent in the chord, so that it's a little bit open to interpretation. So we've actually filled in an octave above that A over here, so that the splash is now in the horns as it was before, and the cello. And then also with the bass clarinet, which is also doing an A, which is that A down there, which is interesting because the bass clarinet is actually lower than the horns at that point. Yeah, which has a lovely blend to it. So we've got that splash. Good. Okay, so then the second violins take over the triplet figure again. And we got back to second clarinet, which is also filling in, and the viola as well. So we've got those doing that left-hand piano roll. And that continues, etc. Good. So then we've got this melody, which is now on the oboe. And notice how that sustain of the B is retained in the clarinet 1. We've got flutes going back to the role that they had before, where they're taking those two upper notes. But there's a slight change in the melody roll here, where we've got that going on, and then we've got strings coming in. So violin ones and a flute one, which is just colouring that violin line. So the purpose of this is just to sort of smooth out various bits. In terms of the fact that if the pedal was being used, then you still get the sonority, you still get that sort of echo of B going through there altogether. It's quite subtle. I mean, other people might not necessarily put it as far along as that. They might sort of cut it off, you know, at the same point there. But it's an interesting little addition. So just flute colouring the top part. And now the oboe comes in because, again, we've got another harmonic change. So before it was all sort of A minory, and then it's all sort of diminished at that point. So that's where the oboe comes back in. Everything else has retained the same role. And then there's a slight change at this point. So we've got a G which comes in the piano. And so what's colouring that? Well, we've still got the cello, but we've also got bass clarinet. So again, that splash is either a horn with a cello or a bass clarinet with the cello as well. And also at this point, it's sustained. So we get a lovely sort of sustain at that point. There we go, that's just it. Everything else is having the same rolls as they did before, so there's no real change. It's just that G has changed slightly. Notice also that there's a slight, let's call it a pizzicato-esque G. If there were more cellos available, he might have even used a pizzicato, and if there was a harp, you might have had a little G on the harp at that point as well. And then we got another sort of change at that point. I keep losing my place at this. It's sort of quite awkward, but here we go, bar 35. So then we've got another splash at this point. So pizzicato, and guess what? We've also got horns, and we've also got both clarinets at that point as well, doing that harmonic sort of function. Interestingly, we don't get a real sense of the B flat too much because that's kind of taken over by the line here. So actually the emphasis is on just the G and the D mostly, because that's just the way it is. And then we've got a D there. So we've got those notes and then an octave above as well. So at this point, the oboe takes over the role of the tune. And then it cuts out. So it's just sort of colouring that very, very slightly. So we've got this roll. Remember that we had that before, where we had the B going on at that point. So we had oboe and clarinet at that point. And now we've got a slightly different version of that, where the violin is actually taking on that role of sustain, and the oboe is actually playing what was written in the piano part at that point. Otherwise, the roles are pretty much the same as well. We've just got the addition of the splash of colour with horns and bass clarinets and clarinet doing that. And then finally, we get into bassoon territory as well. So there's another splash. So the other splash is now pizzicato with that. So actually, we have a slight change here. So what is going on? So we got the splash at that point, and then we've got the bassoon, and then we've got another sustain. So we've got this C and A, G sharp A. So what's happening there? Well, it's just these notes here. So we've got that C, which is sort of going all the way through, and so that's no doubt sustained here. The G is also going all the way through. So instead of the flutes taking over that role, we've now got the clarinets taking over that role. Sorry, no, we haven't. We've got the horn and the clarinet doing that role. Then we've got the sustained notes of the, at this point, second violin in the bass clarinet. So we've got that going on. Notice that it's tied, it's not reiterated. And then we've also got another little added bonus of having more violas going on, divided into 2 or even 3 at that point. So we've got that. Let's add those. Nice. So yeah, it's interesting. We get a sort of sense of having a C which keeps going below that, but there isn't actually one there. It's a sort of weird acoustic phenomena at that point. It's very strange. I keep hearing bomb, which isn't there. It's really, really extraordinary. So then we've got the other roles, which are here, the splash, and now we finally get a bassoon coming in at that point, so that it now blends in. And it's all to do with the build. You know, we're 43 bars into the piece. There has to be some variety and variation. Here we go. Just adds a little woody resonance to it at that point. Then we've got the main tune coming. At this point, it's just on the flute. I don't think it's on the violins, no. And then eventually the violins do come in at that point as well. So everything else is just sustaining. So these rolls here, so that you'll see that bass roll. We've got that, but now we've got another horn coming in. And then, of course, another roll at this point. So even more blend, where things generally tend to retain their elements, the reason for being there. But there's more blend at that point because we've got horn 3 also blending in with the bass clarinet and also the violas because they're just doing the chordal functions. So all the chordal bit is kind of here, and actually it's all there as well. Yeah, that's all the chordal function. Harmonic function. There we go. And then we got the odd splash of the bass and then the main tune. So altogether, I'll just go back from bar 42. Here we go. And notice how the horn comes in consort on the last quaver, so there's a real sense of blend at that point as well. And sustain, rather. Same thing again. Yeah, and it's just a nice little cascading effect down here, where we've just got that sort of single line, which is followed on here, and then it sustains. That comes down. There we go, nice little ninth chord. And it's just blended. Bassoons and clarinets go very well with cellos. So complete melodic function. Look how the bassoon is now sustaining the A as well. And also it's there in the viola. Nice. And then we've also got the C, which is here, and the G and the other C. In fact, let's just get rid of all of that. You'll see how it sustains. Horns keep going. Now, very different at this point, isn't it? Because all we've got is just that left hand going on. But of course, you don't want all of the strings to just do that line, because it'd be very awkward, really, especially sort of string crossing. You're going to get sort of, you know, this one to the C is quite awkward. So instead, we've just got one string away. Well, it's kind of the same thing, actually, but it's just a little bit less cumbersome. Here, it's easier to do that. So that we've got sort of divisi going on, because it's very difficult otherwise to do it. So what actually is happening? Well, it's interesting that the C here is repeated, because here we've got that. And normally we'd have the B and the C, so those notes here are taken up by that second cello. So we kind of got it there. And then bum, 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 and then we expect to have that. And now we've got a C pedal, which is being played all the way through, just by the contrabass or the double bass and the second cello, and also actually the first cellos. So this bit of the element is on those first two quavers. The last element is this C. So you get this sort of nice offbeat sort of idea. Works really well. Let's just have a look at those strings. We get a lovely sustained C all the way through, very smooth. It will probably be played quite legato. We've also got that going on, which kind of emphasizes this bit. In fact, I'll just keep building it up, actually, I think. So this is the trombone coming in. Just playing those moving notes. And you get a very different sort of sonority to that, and now it's tempered slightly with the bass clarinet. Not too noticeable, but rather nice. And then we've also got that sort of very, very, very low horn as well, which is also doing a pedal C. So now we're getting to some interesting differences in texture, where we've got big chords. They would be spread on the piano. That's a ludicrous chord if we have a look at it on the piano. Try playing that. No, I don't think it's possible to get the B flat, no matter how big my hands are. Big hands, Rachmaninoff. I seem to remember, though, Etudes-Tableaux and Jew, I think it was, who used to do those brilliant comic sort of classical music comedy concerts. So what is going on here? What is playing these notes? Well, let's have a look. Let's see what there is. So all all of the bits that we had before, this sort of bit, is still taken over by those lower strings. There's nothing else really going on apart from the odd bassoon. That's really the only sort of difference. Otherwise, all the chordal stuff is happening in the brass, pretty much. So we've got so a second inversion chord, which is spread just like the piano. We've also got the E flat, which is filled in because it's not there, but it would be implied on the trumpets. And then we've got a bass C, which is kind of this bit here, which still goes. So actually the C is not part of that E flat chord here. What else is part of it? All of the wind. So all of that is E flat. Let's just hear it first of all. Quite sort of bright sound at that point. So yeah, an interesting sort of array here. It's quite a wide position for clarinets. So we've got that note here and those notes there. So if I just sort of highlight them in red, so that's what they're doing at that point. And they're sort of blending in. Where's that? That's here. So it's a sort of slight blend, but basically we've got sort of close position there. We've got normal position there, and then a wide gap between, well, not wide, but it's a fourth between the tuba and the rest of the trombone. So all of those are just sort of root position, kind of. Well, that's root position, and yeah, that is root position. That's probably why it sounds quite bright. And then we've got just the two upper notes being taken by the oboes. Interesting that that's not playing an E flat, that's also a G. I would have perhaps have played an E flat at that point to make that sort of blend in with there. And then we've just got a root position chord in the flutes. So it's interesting choices. So we don't have the E flat in the oboes. We don't have so what I'm talking about is that E flat we don't seem to get. Even in here, we still don't get it. So I still don't get that E flat. It's actually the only one that's doing it is that one on the trumpet. Isn't that interesting that only one instrument is playing it? So we've also got the lower E flat, but nothing is actually doubled on that particular instrument. And indeed, there is no E flat at all in the original, so maybe that's a reason why. And of course, normal sort of voice leading will tend to sort of dictate where things go. So we've got the G's being played and then the G going to an F at that point as well, with some of them going. So there was no E flat in this chord, but of course it's just going to that. G and the B flat will go to F and A. No, I didn't want to do that because that's flute 2 and 3. So that's correct. So interestingly enough, how this is also done here. So we've got the C, the D, and the G. That's just being in the flutes. Yeah, and then we've got two upper extensions being doubled, so not the C. And then this F is now part of a different bit here. And then we've also got G's going on. So another wide spacing with clarinet. So isn't that interesting? Wide spacing with clarinets. Who would have thought? but it seems to be pretty effective. And now we've just got a big sort of textural blend at this point. So we still got the sort of same rolls which are being done. So here we've also got the sustained boom boom going on. In fact, we don't tend to have that going on. It's kind of implied. But because we've already had brass and we're building up, he's dropped it out actually. And the little splashes of little colour as well, because of course we can't do that, so that's why the C is sustained through that beat here in the violas. So all sorts of little bits of colour that come in, and then we're just sort of building up at that point as well. So bassoons and clarinets and horns tend to sort of do all of that. Let's just have those on our own. Bass clarinet, prominent, bassoon. Nice. And I loved it when the contra bassoon came in to do that sort of low C at that point. That seems to work really, really nicely. So yeah, very, very much a blended orchestration. So very typical of sort of some Ravel, and very different to a sort of Hollywood orchestration, which tends to be a lot more separated out. But of course, with this sort of music, you can't. There's nothing to separate out. So it's another good reason for having that choice. And then when you've got these sorts of things here, I'll just look at this one last bit. So all of that function is basically in here. So we've got this going on. So all of those notes are part of that. And I think, and the oboes. So that's this bit here. And then we've got a slight change in where that happens as well, where the cellos actually join what's going on here. So this low bass line, which starts off with a G sharp, is in the bassoons, but it's also in the flutes as well. So we've got that whole line. Oh, it's so Star Wars-y. Like that, and notice that they don't play the C sharp that comes in on the cellos, hence the cellos join it, which I think is rather remarkable. So that's all of that, and then all of the other chordal stuff going on is as a result of this big C sharp minor chord right at the beginning. So we got a little splash of that, we got a tam tam, and then we just got sort of what I call the usual sustain. There we go, and that's it. I mean, I went on a little bit further just with the piano, but it basically sort of explained what's going on and how things are coloured and how things are orchestrated. So again, I hope that's sort of useful for you. It's just a useful exercise to sort of do, to sort of really work out, okay, well, that's interesting how that is configured in this bit. That's not something that I immediately would have thought of, but now I will. And also just not having, of course we've got a chord there, but actually this chordal function is still going on. So that's a reason to put the C there, because it's, you know, it's going to C. It's all part of the same sort of chord of C minor at that stage. So yeah, again, I hope that's proved useful to all of you, and that's just something I would definitely do, is have a look at all of Respighi's orchestrations of this 5 tableau etudes. This one, the C and the Seagulls, I think it is. They're really magnificent, and also it makes a huge difference doing it yourself, because it's fine to sort of just look at something, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It's not really teaching you. The only thing that's going to teach you is by just literally copying it out and then doing what I've done now and going through it all and going, why is that happening, and where are they doing it, and why is that as it is. And especially when you're looking at sort of very good orchestration like Respighi, then you'll learn a huge amount from it. Interesting that, you know, there's very little dovetailing going on here. So, you know, there's enormous amounts of sustained horns, which would be pretty tricky to play, and I would imagine that they are breathing wherever they find themselves to be. With a blended sound like this, it's sort of easier to get away with it, because the reverb tail will sort of help you along, depending on the acoustic of the hall. Hopefully a good one. So it does sort of tend to make a huge difference. Anyway, thanks for watching as always.